Just got back from the gym. Brutal, absolutely brutal. So this is my second to last day of the 6-week cycle. It's peak week, meaning that volume is very, very high, and I'm also kind of nearing my fat loss phase. So fatigue is higher, work capacity is lower, and it's interesting to see how much your mind wants to give up when your energy resources aren't necessarily there to do what you're here to do. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about human design and kind of my experiment and playing with it. But before I go into that, I want to preface this with human design can become another form of conditioning. It can become another box. It can become a whole nother paradigm to kind of get sucked into, in which we outsource ourselves to another system. So that's the first thing, is I'm not a purist in this by any means, but what it has helped me do is to give myself a little deeper insight and awareness in terms of who I am, how I operate, how my mechanics work, and how I interface and how I create my experience of reality. So I am a 5-1 Splenic projector. So let's start from the beginning here. What does it mean to be a projector? So we have different aura types in terms of how our energy is focused. And so for projector, that means that we have a very penetrating aura. Think of it as kind of like a cone that goes out, and it's deeply, deeply focused on somebody else. Essentially what we can do is we can see deeply into the other person. We kind of like be in their soul. And this is something I was really aware of before, but what's interesting is that a couple times people have responded to my presence a little differently, and they've mentioned it could be an intense experience. And what's also interesting too is that just through communication with clients before they started working with me, they're like, I was afraid to reach out to you. Like, I was nervous, I was scared. I'm thinking to myself, like, what are you talking about? We're gonna have a great time. There's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be anxious of. So it's just interesting to see how the energy kind of plays out. So being a projector, what that also means is that you don't have an energy center like many other types do, especially your generators. So what that means is that our energy reserves aren't that high. We have to be very aware of what we say yes to, but more importantly, we have to be very aware and in tune with what we say no to. So as a projector, you've probably been heavily conditioned, if you are one, to work a lot and to work hard and to grind and hustle and expend a lot of physical energy in trying to create whatever it is that you're trying to create. We don't have that capacity to do that. We can go through short periods of bursts of doing it, especially when we're in our energy and our creative state, but we don't have the seemingly Energizer Bunny battery capacity like generators do. They love to work very hard. They love to build in the physical. They have all these energy reserves they have to offload so they can rest. So the way that we've been conditioned in society is to go through, working hard, long hours, pushing through, and what inevitably happens is that there's burnout. Like, you become burnt out, exhausted, completely depleted. Sometimes it feels like your soul has just completely left your body and you feel kind of like a corpse. And that's by taking on way too many things. So the reason why that happens is one, because of our conditioning in society. The second thing is that as a projector, you have this deep need to be recognized and to be seen. So what happens is that because we have this need to be recognized and seen, we accept too many invitations because we get that validation kick, right? Oh, someone recognized me. I want to be a part of whatever's going on, even if that choice isn't true for us. And so taking on too many invitations that aren't true because of this need to be recognized spreads ourselves way too fucking thin. So that's why being really in tune with what your yes is and what your no is so important, because it's easy to take in invitations that are not correct for you, which then of course prevents that actual big yes from coming through in the future. So when we aren't actually in our energy and we're kind of operating from our programming and conditioning, the not self theme, meaning the part of you that is being expressed or experienced that is not you, is going to result in a lot of bitterness. And it kind of becomes expressed as frustration with yourself, frustration with the world, kind of judgment towards other people, judgment towards yourself. It's kind of being in that really funky state where it's like, well, shit, nothing's fucking working. And it's like that really dense ass heavy energy of being bitter. And on the flip side of that, your true theme of who you actually are is massive success, ease, flow, and you're just cruising and everything kind of clicks and there's a lot of synchronicities that keep showing up for you and you're not meeting yourself in a lot of resistance. So those are the two main themes of the projector. Massive success, the not self theme being bitterness. And I've been there plenty of times. Wouldn't recommend it. It's a tough place to get out of if you're not really aware of what's happening in your internal state. So let's talk about the lines for a minute here too. So the fifth line, I'm a 5-1. First line is going to be the conscious side, what we're aware of. So the fifth line is going to be perceived as being the heretic and also as the savior. So how this plays out is that people project expectations on top of you. They have this idea in their heads of who they think you are. And a lot of times it comes from this place of, you can solve my problem, you can save me. If there's a crisis, you're the person I can go to because you know how to resolve it. And the flip side of that is the heretic, which is essentially you're going to be burned at the stake for who you are, your philosophies, what you bring to the world, the type of experience that people have when they're in their field. So think of it kind of like, not to be a messiah here, but like Jesus, right? He was crucified for what he brought to the world. And so what interesting thing that happens is that people will either see you as their savior until you don't meet their expectations, and then they fucking hate you, right? It's this dichotomy of, I love you, then I hate you. I love you, then I hate you, based off the projections they have in their head around the expectations they have around who you are and what they can provide for you. So a lot of this is this projection field that's being created. And with that, because if you're a projector and you have that fifth line, there is a double projection field, which means that is even amplified even more. And so your state is going to be naturally very polarizing, even without the intent to be disruptive, even without the intent to be polarizing. That's just the way that people experience you because of the mechanics of your energy and how they play out in the physical world. So the other side of that is going to be the first line, which is going to be unconscious. It's going to kind of play out without necessarily thinking about it or being aware about it. It's just going to be part of your natural movements. And that is the line of being the investigator and the researcher. So what that means for me, my experience, is that I love to dig into systems, right? I love to study things, figure out how every detail of how something works, and really have a fundamental understanding of the mechanics and how each segment of a system lines up, and be able to take that system and either improve it, shift it, move some things around, and then take that system and then be able to explain it in a way that's much more practical and pragmatic for people. So think about taking something that's very complex, what seems kind of elusive or esoteric, and put it into very pragmatic and simple terms for mass understanding or mass adoption. So I always have this pull to really get down to the nook and cranny of things, and which is why kind of human design interests me for a moment here, because there's a massive playing out of energetics as well as the conditioning and programming. So at the fundamental core level, if you want to be the true creator of your experience and be able to experience who you are, those two things have to happen. There is no way to experience that without understanding your own energy, without understanding what aspects of your paradigms, your beliefs, your thought process, your model of the world has become a result through adopted beliefs and all the things that we've been taught and learned throughout society. The flip side of being the one line, though, is that there can be this not self theme of needing to know all the information before you feel like you're ready, right? So like, I need to know more, I need to learn more, I need to know all the details, I need this. So there can be this form of almost procrastination that can show up, and needing the next thing before you can put the thing out there. And there's that need for comfort, there's that need for external security, so money in the bank, a house, food, shelter. But the problem with that becomes that there's an over-reliance on the physical world to create this internal sense of security and comfort, which then keeps you in the box of not making any moves, because you can't create more of that internally if you're relying on that externally, right? So these are the not self themes, aspects of us who we are actually not. And so there's always like this duality that's playing out within us. We have who we are and we have who we are not. And so when we're meeting a lot of resistance and struggle in our lives, it's because we're coming from this place of who we are not. We're coming from our mind and our conditioning and our programming. And again, human design is a way to kind of have a deeper understanding of kind of creating that bridge of that awareness of self that can be a challenge to do if we're only speaking purely about the energetics, because to an extent there is a form of conceptualization and intellectualization that happens for these associations to be created, for these links to be connected. And so again, it's not coming from this place of human design is the absolute truth, right? Because that is not always the case. And what I've been playing with lately is taking this concept and evolving it beyond what's typically taught in this space right now, because there's some really important nuances that I don't see being discussed or evolved. It's still kind of in the state in which it was and which it was created. I think it was maybe going on 30 years now. So it's a matter of blending these deeper nuances of reality creation and who you are within that system itself and improving it, which is kind of what I naturally do anyway. So when I was growing up, going back to this piece of non-acceptance, right? I didn't really feel like I fit in. I was like, these really aren't my people, but I need somewhere to put myself. And so I put on the mask, created the identity, and I fit in. And us projectors are probably the highest susceptible to conditioning, meaning that it's so easy to lose who we are by homogenizing ourselves with everybody else so that we find a tribe, we get in, we get along. And which makes it a particularly interesting experience for us when we're trying to undo and unlearn a lot of these patterns that we had. So people have mentioned to me in the past, and I've got awareness around this too, is that you're kind of quiet, you're kind of distant, you're kind of observant. And I'm not one of those people that just fucking walks in the room with like really loud energy and is like, holy shit. Like kind of like Tony Robbins energy, right? He's just massive presence in the way that he speaks and who he is. But for me, it's always been observing, very observant, very aware, and just kind of reading people, reading their energy and waiting. So this is an interesting thing about being a projector, is the concept of waiting for the invitation. And there's two ways that this is experienced. The way that is formally taught is that you wait for the verbal invitation, meaning that you're only recognized when someone verbally speaks to you about something, asks you a question about something, and then you can provide guidance. But there's a second piece to this here, and this is an energetic invitation. And if you can kind of feel someone's energy, it's either going to be open or closed, right? The closed off energy is going to have a certain texture and quality to it, and then the open energy is going to have a certain texture and quality to it. So especially like in this coaching space, there's energetic hits that you're going to get from your system that'll be your guiding principles. And so it's not only about waiting for the formal invitation, it's also about getting an energetic invitation to reach out to someone, to speak to someone, to make a comment, whatever it is. For me, my authority, and there's different authorities, there's sacral, there's emotional, there's the mental, there's the ego. Authority is that everything that I do is coming from a moment-to-moment basis, meaning that I don't make any choices unless I kind of know in the moment. It's either yes or no, it's a yes or no, it's a yes or no, yes or no, constantly. And so that's the way that my energy works within my system. It's very instinctual, it's very intuitive, and it's kind of has this deeper underlying knowing to it. So when I was really, when I was younger and I had a lot of anxieties because I wasn't actually listening to my authority. I was listening to my mind and trying to control everything. And so once I recognized that I could actually live in the moment and just be really aware of what my energy is telling me, then it dropped my anxiety level to essentially none, dropped my stress level to essentially none, overwhelmed to essentially none. And it's really about being present. Is this a yes or no? Is this a yes or no? Is this a yes or no? And the interesting thing about the splenic authority is that it's very quiet. It's very, and it'll come, it'll go. And sometimes it'll come around again based off interaction that you have in your environment. But it's this inner type of whisper that almost happens around this is correct, this is not correct. And not that there is such a thing as right or wrong, correct or not correct, but it's kind of like this guidance system in which you could use to navigate choice, navigate decision making. And what happens is that because, being a projector, we're so conditioned to do things a certain way based off of our mental constructs, we often don't have the body awareness to actually listen to what's true because our mind is running the show all the time as being the authority. So we talked about the fifth line, we talked about the first line, we talked about the strategy, which is wait for the invitation, we talked about the authority, which is the splenic. And so these are kind of some guiding principles as to how all of this kind of comes together in terms of your internal ecosystem of who you are. And everyone's got different lines, everyone has different authorities, everyone has a different type of energy type, but this is kind of like a deeper insight into how I operate, kind of who I am. I'm sure we got some projectors in this group too. And when I first found out about this, it was like, holy shit, this makes a lot of fucking sense. And I was doing a lot of these things naturally to an extent. I just wasn't aware that, oh yeah, this is how I operate. This is kind of how I move through life, and this is how I navigate myself. And so what it did, it helped solidify some things that were more elusive to me, that I couldn't quite have this deeper awareness and understanding around, and allowed me to see myself at a deeper level. So for many people, the ultimate question is, who am I? Who am I all about? But if you're a projector, the real question you ask is, who are you? So we have this deep fascination with guiding other people to figure out who they actually are and how to move energy more effectively, more efficiently, so they can improve, or they can innovate, or they can solve a problem faster, or they can improve a process, save money, make money, etc. So think of coach, mentors, CEOs, people who are in crisis management, people who are mediators, ones who are able to see the 30,000 foot view of what's happening within a situation and how to streamline it, decrease the resistance, and make sure things are back up to speed as quickly as possible. So those are typically the roles that projectors have within business, within life. And it's taken quite a while, and this is an evolving process too, right? Like deconditioning never really ends because there's so many layers of yourself you get to fall into over and over and over again. But it's taken a long time for me to have the awareness that, I don't have to operate the way that most people do because I can't, and it's not really true to my blueprint and to my system. And so I really had to figure out what is true for me and how to be in my own energy and to really settle into that. And there's these gaps that we often have in like this creative process. It's like we're creating something and we're not seeing the feedback that we expect. And a lot of times that can lead to frustration. Well, shit, this is not working. It's not working. I have to do more. I have to do more. And that's just the mind trying to meet outcomes, trying to meet expectations. and that forces us out of our natural state. And so being able to settle in to your energy and to your experience is what actually creates your experience, because there's a lot of trying that can happen. We can fall into the trap of trying, we can fall into the trap of force, trying to make shit happen. And you can just feel the energy that's behind that. It's entirely different than when it comes from this natural source of true creativity and inspiration that has no agenda, that has no need to be seen or validated or recognized. It's just you expressing yourself in the world. And that's the magical place to be in, because it's just naturally an extension of you, and there's no attachment to it. But as soon as we get into this state where it's like, oh shit, things aren't working, I better force some shit, that's when we know it's like, you're not being yourself. And to settle back into your energy, back into your experience, so that you can actually play out who you are, and you kind of be the more immersed within yourself, immersed within the reality, instead of trying to force things to happen, instead of trying to make things happen, which for us often ends up in bitterness and disappointment and frustration and, why aren't people doing these things? And which kind of brings me back to my last point, is kind of the role of unsolicited advice, right? So it's easy for us to see things where things are not going the way that they're supposed to, and be able to have the bigger picture and know exactly how to create the solution. But if that openness isn't there between us and another person, that advice often goes unimplemented. It's just disregarded. It's not taken into consideration unless the other person is open to receiving it. So in my past experiences, I used to give a shit ton of unsolicited advice around things. And would it solve the problem? Yes. Would it decrease the resistance? Yes. Would it stop the struggle? Yes. But because they weren't open to receiving it, it didn't work. And I would think to myself, well, why don't you just fucking do it? It's right here. It's right in front of you. This whole entire situation would be over if you just implemented it. But because they didn't fully see me and recognize me and kind of adopt into my frame, it didn't work. And so that's coming from this place of when that energetic invitation isn't there, or when the formal invitation isn't there, unsolicited advice doesn't fucking work, and it's going to backfire on you most likely, and it's going to lead to more frustration and bitterness. And this is really, really apparent for me when I was personal training, because back then I wasn't actually coaching people. I was just giving them diet plans, workout plans, and just the execution element and the extraction element, not the extraction element. And so what I mean by that is, someone, client would come up to me and was like, yeah, I'm really kind of struggling to lose weight. But they were coming from here, right? They weren't actually energetically willing to solve the problem yet. They just knew that they had a problem, and they were more or less communicating that, but they weren't ready to receive my advice. And so I tell them something about it, and then they get defensive about it, and I'd be like, what the fuck? And then so it would create some strain in our relationships. And so there has to be kind of like this lock and key mechanism that happens for both of these energies to work together, so that there is a co-creative process and both people can evolve together in whatever it is they're trying to create. So it's really been fascinating to observe and witness myself, my interactions in the online space, my interactions in my relationship, and to just play with these concepts and these ideas. Because again, this is not a rigid framework. This is not the end all be all. It's just something that you can bring into your field of awareness and see how you respond, or how you react to how your energy is creating your reality. And there's some little things you can play with and just be observant without being attached to what's happening, without judging what's happening, without being attached to the outcome. But it just brings a certain level of quality to your experience. That sometimes, for many of us, reality can feel kind of dull. It feels kind of flat. It's like, fuck, this is boring as shit, because the level in which we've been interfacing with it. And so this is a tool, to an extent, to allow you to dive deeper into the elements of your internal landscape, the external landscape, and how you can mold it, how you can create it, and how you can shift it. So yeah. That's a brief summary. There's so much more to human design that I'm really not going to get into, because I would be here for hours and hours and hours. And it's a beautiful Friday day. I don't really feel like doing that. But if you are curious about exploring more of this, I'm going to drop a link in the comments below where you can kind of get your charts, which will give you pretty much like a basic rundown of your energy type, your strategy, your authority, some aspects of you that you can identify with that are who you are, and then more importantly, who you are not. And it just kind of gives you this blueprint that you can take into your field and just give you a deeper understanding of your mechanics, your awareness, and how to make life more fun, right? Because that's what we're actually here for. Is not just to make it through life, but actually to experience the joy of our own creations and who we are, and the quality of what we're here to create, and the level of intimacy we have in our relationships, and the communities that we can build, and who we can be involved with in this creative process. But a lot of times, that doesn't happen because we're not really being ourselves. And this is a fun way to explore a little bit deeper into that. So if you got questions, shoot them below.